The late autumn rain battered the quiet cul-de-sac of Willow Lane, a sleepy suburban street in Portland, Oregon, where tidy bungalows stood shoulder to shoulder under a bruised, gray sky. The air was thick with the scent of wet leaves, chimney smoke, and the faint tang of ozone, while streetlights flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the slick pavement. Detective Sarah Monroe, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a reputation for untangling impossible cases, stood beneath a dripping oak tree, her gaze fixed on the yellow police tape flapping wildly around number 27. A call had come in at dawn. A death, suspicious, possibly murder. The details were murky, but the dispatcher's voice had trembled, repeating the word unsettling like a warning. That alone was enough to pull Monroe from her coffee-fueled morning routine, her instincts already humming with unease. The homeowner, Mrs. Clara Thompson, a widow known for her relentless neighborhood gossip, had described the scene as wrong, just wrong. That phrase lodged in Monroe's mind, sharp and persistent, like a splinter she couldn't ignore. She pulled her trench coat tighter against the chill, her boots splashing through shallow puddles as she approached the house. The front door creaked open, revealing Officer Jake Carter, a rookie with a nervous habit of adjusting his cap. His face was pale, his eyes darting as he stepped aside to let her in. The air inside was heavy, saturated with the cloying scent of lavender air freshener that barely masked something sharper, metallic, that made Monroe's nose twitch. The living room was a time capsule of mid-century Americana, doilies on armchairs, polished wood furniture, a faded floral rug, but the atmosphere felt oppressive, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Carter gestured toward the staircase, his voice low. "Up there, detective. Second floor, master bedroom." Monroe nodded, her eyes sweeping the walls, where faded family photos lined the hallway. Smiling faces frozen in time, their cheerfulness jarring against the gloom. She climbed the stairs, each step groaning under her weight, and felt the weight of unseen eyes. Neighbors, no doubt, peering from behind curtains across the street, whispering about the tragedy that had shattered Willow Lane's quiet facade. She knew streets like this, tight-knit until secrets spilled, then everyone turned stranger, guarding their own truths. In the master bedroom, lit by a single buzzing fluorescent bulb that cast harsh shadows, lay the body. Henry Walsh, a 42-year-old accountant who'd moved to Willow Lane 6 months ago, was sprawled across a neatly made bed, his eyes wide open, staring blankly at the cracked plaster ceiling. His flannel pajamas were pristine, his hands folded neatly over his chest, but his face was frozen in a look of quiet horror, as if he glimpsed something unspeakable in his final moments. No blood, no wounds, just an unnatural stillness that felt meticulously staged. Monroe crouched beside the bed, her gaze sweeping the room, a half-empty coffee mug on the nightstand, its contents cold and congealed, a dog-eared paperback of The Great Gatsby Dash, its spine creased, and, most curiously, a single playing card, an ace of spades, tucked under the mug's handle. She picked it up, the card's edges worn but clean, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft seeping through the old windows. The ace of spades wasn't just a card, it was a symbol, a warning, or perhaps a signature. She turned it over, noting a faint smudge of ink on the back, like a fingerprint that hadn't fully set. "What's the story?" she asked Carter, who hovered in the doorway, shifting his weight. "Mrs. Thompson found him," he said, flipping open his notepad with a tremble. "She checks on him every morning, says he's been withdrawn since his wife, Lisa, left him. This time," she heard, humming. Monroe's brow furrowed, her fingers tightening around the card. "Yeah, like a tune, coming from the house." She thought it was the radio, but when she knocked, no answer. Used her spare key, came in, and found him like this. Monroe stood, her mind already turning. A locked house, a dead man, and a humming no one could place. It was a puzzle that both intrigued and unsettled her. She glanced at the window, locked tight, blinds drawn. No sign of forced entry. The door had been secured when Mrs. Thompson entered, the key still in the lock. "Who was he?" she asked, her voice low but firm, cutting through the room's oppressive silence. "Henry Walsh, worked from home, kept to himself. Neighbors say he was polite but distant. Paid his HOA dues on time, though," Carter added, as if that detail anchored him in the face of the unknown. Monroe's lips twitched, but her focus stayed on the card. An ace of spades wasn't random, it carried weight. a message she hadn't yet decoded. She slipped it into an evidence bag and turned to the medical examiner, Dr. Emmeline Gwynn, who was packing up her kit with practiced efficiency. Cause of death? Monroe asked, her eyes flicking to the body. Nothing obvious, Gwynn said, adjusting her glasses. No trauma, no toxins I can detect without a lab. Could be cardiac, but he's fit for his age. We'll know more after the autopsy. Monroe nodded, but her gut screamed this wasn't natural. She stepped back, her eyes catching something else, a faint scuff mark on the hardwood floor near the closet, like a shoe had dragged in haste. It was subtle, but it told her someone had been here, standing just out of sight, perhaps watching as Walsh's life slipped away. She filed it away and headed downstairs, where Mrs. Thompson waited in the kitchen, clutching a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The widow's eyes were red-rimmed, but her jaw was set, like she was guarding more than grief. Monroe sat across from her, the table's worn surface scratched with years of use. Tell me about the humming, she said, her voice calm but probing. Mrs. Thompson's fingers tightened around the mug, her knuckles whitening. It was soft, like a lullaby, but eerie. I heard it through the wall last night. Around 2 a.m. thought it was Henry, but he never played music loud. When I checked this morning, it was gone, and she trailed off, her gaze drifting to the window, where rain streaked the glass like tears. Monroe leaned forward, her voice softening but her eyes sharp. Did he have visitors? Anyone new on the street? Not that I saw, Mrs. Thompson said, but her voice wavered, betraying a flicker of doubt. He kept to himself after Lisa left. But there was a woman. Saw her a few times, late at night, walking by his house. Young, blonde, always in a hurry. Monroe's pulse quickened, a thread of the case pulling taut. Did you get a name? No, but she wasn't from here. Too polished for Willow Lane, Mrs. Thompson said, her lips pursing as if the memory tasted sour. Monroe thanked her and stepped outside, the rain now a faint mist that clung to her coat. Across the street, curtains twitched at number 29, where the new neighbor, Ethan Brooks, lived. A former journalist turned recluse, he'd moved in 3 months ago and already sparked whispers for his late-night habits, lights burning past midnight, the faint clack of a typewriter echoing through the quiet. She made a mental note to visit him next, but lingered on the sidewalk, her eyes scanning the street. Willow Lane seemed frozen, the houses watching her as much as she watched them. Every window had a story, every door a secret. Back at the station, Monroe spread Walsh's file across her cluttered desk, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Divorced, no kids, no criminal record. His social media was sparse, mostly reposts about tax season and the occasional photo of a sunset over the Willamette River. But a detail caught her eye, a bank transfer of $10,000 to an untraceable account 2 weeks ago, flagged as consulting fees. She cross-referenced it with the neighborhood's HOA records, which listed complaints about suspicious activity at Walsh's house, late-night deliveries, footsteps in the alley, and, curiously, reports of humming from multiple residents, not just Mrs. Thompson. The ace of spades nagged at her, its weight heavier than its size suggested. She ran it through the database, her fingers tapping impatiently as the system churned. A hit, a cold case from Seattle. 5 years back, a string of deaths, all men, all found with an ace of spades nearby. No suspects, no clear motives, just a killer who vanished like smoke. The victims were unconnected, different ages, professions, backgrounds, but the card was their common thread, a calling card for someone who killed with precision and purpose. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to the present. It was Carter, his voice tight with urgency. The coffee mug, traces of a sedative, enough to knock him out but not kill him. We're still testing for anything lethal. Monroe's jaw tightened. Someone had been in that room, drugging Walsh, humming a tune, and leaving a card as a taunt. She grabbed her coat and headed to number 29, the rain picking up again, drumming against her hood. Ethan Brooks answered the door, a lean man in his 30s with unshaven stubble and eyes that darted too quickly, like a cornered animal's. His living room was a chaos of books, old newspapers, and empty coffee cups, the air thick with cigarette smoke that curled lazily toward the ceiling. Heard about Walsh, he said before she could speak, his voice clipped, almost rehearsed. Terrible thing. You hear anything last night? Monroe asked, watching his hands as they fidgeted with a lighter. He lit a cigarette, the flame trembling in his grip. Just the rain. I was up late, writing. Humming, she pressed, stepping closer, her boots leaving damp prints on the hardwood. His fingers froze, the cigarette halfway to his mouth, and for a split second, his composure cracked. No, he said, too fast, his voice a pitch too high. Nothing like that. Her eyes caught a stack of playing cards on his cluttered desk. The top won an ace of spades, its black spade stark against the worn table. Her heart skipped, but she kept her face neutral, years of training masking her suspicion. Mind if I look around? Brooks hesitated, his gaze flicking to the desk, then back to her. Be my guest, he said with a shrug that didn't quite hide his tension. She moved to the desk, casually flipping through papers, clippings about the Seattle case, handwritten notes detailing Walsh's routines, even a map of Willow Lane with number 27 circled in red. Brooks wasn't a journalist. He was obsessed, a man chasing a story or running from one. You knew Walsh better than you let on, she said, turning to him, her voice steady but laced with accusation. He stubbed out his cigarette, his jaw tight, the ash scattering across the desk. He was trouble, asked too many questions, dug into things he shouldn't have. Like what? Monroe's voice was calm, but her hand hovered near her holster, senses on edge. Before he could answer, a crash erupted from the backyard, sharp and jarring, like glass shattering on concrete. Monroe spun, drawing her gun, and caught a glimpse of a figure darting past the window, blonde hair, a flash of a red coat, gone in an instant. She bolted outside, Brooks shouting behind her, but the figure had vanished, swallowed by the narrow alley behind Willow Lane. The backyard was a mess of overturned patio furniture, a broken flower pot spilling dirt across the grass. Whoever it was had fled in a hurry, leaving a single clue, a red scarf caught on a fence post, its fabric damp and frayed. Monroe bagged it and turned back to Brooks, who stood in the doorway, his face pale, his hands shaking. Who was that? She demanded, her voice cutting through the rain. I don't know, he stammered, but his eyes screamed a lie. She cuffed him for obstruction and called for backup, her mind racing. At the station, Brooks cracked under pressure, his bravado crumbling in the stark interrogation room. Her name's Anna Reed, he admitted, sweat beading on his forehead. She came to me a month ago, said Walsh was blackmailing her. I didn't ask details, just helped her watch him. Blackmailing her over what? Monroe pressed, leaning across the table, her gaze unyielding. Something from Seattle, he muttered, his voice barely audible. She never said what, but she was scared. Said Walsh had proof, something that could ruin her. Monroe's mind clicked into overdrive. She dug into Anna Reed, pulling every record she could access. No trace in Portland, but a photo from the Seattle case surfaced, a blonde woman at a victim's funeral listed as a witness. She'd vanished after testifying, her statement vague, her whereabouts unknown. Monroe's gut screamed. Reed was the humming killer, and Walsh had stumbled onto her past, maybe a secret worth killing for. She tracked Reed to a rundown motel on the city's edge, the neon sign buzzing in the gathering dusk, its red glow flickering like a warning. Room 12 was dark, but the door was ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze. Monroe pushed it open, her gun drawn, the air inside stale and heavy with the scent of cheap perfume and mildew. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled as if someone had left in a hurry. On the dresser, a deck of playing cards, an ace of spades on top, its edges curling, a photo of Walsh, his face circled in red ink, and a small notebook, its pages filled with names, dates, and addresses, some crossed out, others circled, including Walsh's. A faint hum drifted from the bathroom, a soft, eerie lullaby that sent a shiver down Monroe's spine. She gripped her gun tighter and pushed the door open, the hinges creaking. Anna Reed stood at the sink, her blonde hair loose, her reflection meeting Monroe's in the cracked mirror. She wore a red coat, now unbuttoned, her hands steady as she polished a small glass vial. You're late, she said, her voice calm, almost melodic, as if she'd been expecting this moment. Why Walsh? Monroe asked, her gun steady, her voice cutting through the hum. Reed smiled, chillingly serene, her eyes glinting with something dark. He remembered me. From Seattle. Thought he could profit from my mistakes. And the others? Monroe stepped closer, her boots scuffing the tiles, her voice low but unyielding. They were practice, Reed said, her fingers brushing the vial, her tone almost wistful. Men who thought they could own me, control me. They learned otherwise. Monroe's eyes flicked to the vial, her mind racing. Put it down, she ordered, her voice sharp. Reed's smile widened, but she didn't move. You think you've caught me, detective, but you're only seeing half the board. Before Monroe could react, Reed lunged, not for the vial, but for a knife tucked behind the sink. Monroe tackled her, the blade clattering to the floor as they hit the tiles. Reed fought like a cornered animal, her nails clawing, her strength surprising, but Monroe pinned her, the cuffs clicking into place with a satisfying snap. The vial rolled under the sink, unbroken, its contents glinting in the dim light. At the station, Reed confessed to 4 murders, including Walsh's, her voice eerily calm as she detailed her ritual. The sedative in his coffee slowed him. A toxin in his system, undetectable without specific tests, stopped his heart. The humming was her signature, a lullaby from a childhood she refused to discuss, its notes a haunting echo of her pain. Brooks was charged as an accessory, his notes tying him to Reed's plans, though he swore he never knew she'd kill. Willow Lane went quiet again, the rain washing away the last traces of chaos. But Monroe felt the neighbors' eyes as she left the street, their curtains twitching, their whispers resuming. The houses stood silent, but their walls held stories, grudges, betrayals, secrets that didn't die with Walsh. Back at her desk, Monroe stared at the ace of spades, now sealed in an evidence bag, its black spade stark against the plastic. Reed was caught, her confession airtight, but one detail gnawed at her, a 5th Seattle victim, never linked to the others, with no card left behind. The case file described a woman, not a man, found in a motel much like Reed's, her death ruled as suicide but flagged as suspicious. No ace of spades, no humming, but the same eerie precision. Monroe lit a cigarette, the smoke curling upward, her mind refusing to let go. She pulled the Seattle file again, cross-referencing names, dates, anything that might connect. A witness statement caught her eye. A neighbor who'd seen a man leaving the woman's motel room, described as ordinary, forgettable, with a habit of whistling softly. Not humming, but close enough to make Monroe's pulse quicken. She dug deeper, pulling records from Willow Lane's HOA complaints. A name surfaced, Daniel Harper, a quiet resident at number 31, a retired insurance adjuster who'd lived on the street for decades. He'd filed a complaint about Walsh's late-night deliveries, mentioning strange sounds at number 27. Monroe hadn't interviewed him, assuming his age, late 60s, made him irrelevant. But now she remembered his house, its blinds always drawn, its porch empty except for a single rocking chair that creaked in the wind. She drove back to Willow Lane, the street now cloaked in twilight, the rain reduced to a faint drizzle. Harper's house was dark, but a faint light flickered in the basement window. She knocked, her hand resting on her gun, her senses on high alert. The door opened slowly, revealing Harper, a wiry man with thinning hair and eyes that seemed too sharp for his unassuming demeanor. "Detective," he said, his voice soft, almost soothing. "I wondered when you'd come. Mind if we talk?" Monroe asked, her tone neutral but her eyes scanning his face for tells. He stepped aside, gesturing her in. The living room was sparse, smelling of old books and linseed oil, with a single armchair facing a blank wall. No TV, no photos, just a deck of playing cards on a side table, the top one an ace of spades. Her stomach tightened, but she kept her expression blank. "You knew Walsh," she said, not a question. Harper smiled faintly, his fingers brushing the cards. "Everyone knew Walsh. Nosy, always poking around. Asked me about Seattle once, like he knew something." "What did he know?" Monroe asked, stepping closer, her voice low. Harper's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. Enough to get himself killed. Before she could press further, a soft whistle drifted from the basement, a tune eerily similar to Reed's lullaby. Monroe's hand went to her gun, her heart pounding. "Who's down there?" she demanded. Harper's face hardened, his calm cracking. "You're too late, detective." She didn't wait for an explanation. She pushed past him, descending the narrow basement stairs, the whistling growing louder, more insistent. The basement was dimly lit, cluttered with boxes and old furniture, but in the corner stood a woman, older, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes wild. She held a syringe, its needle glinting, and beside her was a chair with restraints, empty but stained with something dark. "Drop it," Monroe ordered, her gun trained on the woman. The woman laughed, a jagged sound, and dropped the syringe, raising her hands. "You don't understand," she said, her voice hoarse. "They deserved it. All of them." Harper appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his face a mask of resignation. "She's my sister," he said quietly. "Ellen. Walsh found her, threatened to expose us." Monroe's mind raced, pieces snapping into place. Ellen was the fifth Seattle victim, not dead but hidden, working with Harper to silence anyone who got too close. Reed was their protege, trained to kill, or humming a twisted echo of Ellen's whistling. Together, they'd orchestrated a string of murders, using the ace of spades to taunt the police. "Why?" Monroe asked, her gun steady, her voice cutting through the basement's damp air. Ellen's eyes blazed. "They took everything, our home, our lives. Walsh was just the latest. He thought he could blackmail us, but he didn't know who he was dealing with." Backup arrived, flooding the basement with light and noise. Harper and Ellen were cuffed, their faces impassive as they were led away. The basement yielded more: a journal detailing their victims, a box of syringes, and a stack of aces of spades, each marked with a different initial. Willow Lane was quiet again, but Monroe knew it would never be the same. The neighbors' whispers would linger, their trust shattered. Back at her desk, she stared at the evidence bags, cards, syringes, Reed's notebook. The case was closed, Harper and Ellen charged with conspiracy and murder, Reed's confession tying up the loose ends. But one question remained: a final entry in Ellen's journal, a name Monroe didn't recognize, marked with a question mark and a date 2 weeks from now. She exhaled, the smoke from her cigarette curling into the air, and knew this wasn't over. Somewhere, another ace of spades was waiting, another lullaby ready to hum in the dark. Thank you for being with us today. Support the channel with a like, it helps us develop. And yes, your subscription is our main motivator.